Imagine standing on a vast African plain thousands of years ago. There are no roads, no buildings, no engines, and no sound of modern civilization. Only the wind moving through the grass and the distant calls of animals. The sun is slowly rising above the horizon when something enormous appears in the distance. At first, it looks like a rock moving across the landscape. Then you see the legs, the massive body, the thick skin, and finally, the horn. A rhinoceros. It looks like an animal from another age, and in a way, it is. But what if I told you that the rhinoceros is not simply an ancient-looking animal that somehow survived into the modern world? What if its real story is far stranger? The rhinoceros family has been evolving for roughly 40 million years. During that time, the Earth changed almost beyond recognition. Forests appeared and disappeared. Continents moved. Oceans changed shape. Temperatures rose and fell. Ice ages transformed entire landscapes. Giant mammals appeared, dominated their environments, and eventually vanished. Yet the rhinoceros family continued to survive. But the animal we see today is only a tiny piece of that enormous story. Millions of years ago, the world was a very different place. The dinosaurs were already gone, and mammals were beginning to dominate many ecosystems. Forests covered huge areas, and new species were constantly evolving. Among them were the distant relatives of rhinoceroses. They were not necessarily large. They did not all have horns. Some were relatively small animals moving through dense forests, feeding on leaves, shoots, and soft vegetation. Looking at one of these ancient animals, you might not immediately recognize it as a relative of the rhinoceros standing in front of you today. But evolution works slowly. There is no moment when one animal suddenly gives birth to a completely different species. Instead, tiny differences accumulate generation after generation. Perhaps one population develops slightly stronger legs. Another becomes better at processing certain plants. Another becomes larger, because larger bodies provide an advantage in its environment. Over thousands of generations, these differences become more noticeable. Over millions of years, they can produce animals that look completely different from their ancestors. And the rhinoceros family became one of the great evolutionary experiments of the mammal world. There were small species, heavy species, forest species, grassland species, horned species, and hornless species. Some had one horn, some had two. Some had unusual skull shapes. Others developed enormous bodies. One of the most spectacular examples was Paraceratherium. It was not a direct ancestor of modern rhinoceroses, but a distant relative belonging to the same broader family. And it was one of the largest land mammals ever to exist. Imagine a creature towering several meters above the ground, with enormous legs supporting a body weighing many tons. Its long neck allowed it to reach vegetation high above the ground. There was no need for a massive horn. Its size itself was an extraordinary adaptation. Standing beside such an animal would completely change your idea of what a rhinoceros relative could look like. But size is not always the answer. Evolution does not simply make animals bigger and bigger. It creates different solutions for different environments. And when the environment changes, yesterday's perfect solution can become today's problem. This is exactly what happened many times throughout the history of rhinoceroses. Forests disappeared. Grasslands expanded. Temperatures changed. New predators appeared. New competitors arrived. Species that could adapt survived. Species that could not eventually disappeared. This cycle continued for millions of years. Then Earth entered one of its most dramatic chapters. The Ice Age. Huge amounts of water became locked inside massive ice sheets. Temperatures dropped across the northern hemisphere. Entire ecosystems changed. Instead of warm forests, enormous cold grasslands stretched across Eurasia. This environment became home to some of the most famous animals in prehistoric history. Mammoths walked across the plains. Wild horses traveled in herds. Ancient bison grazed across the grass. Wolves and giant cats followed the movements of their prey. And among these giants lived one of the most extraordinary rhinoceroses ever to exist. The woolly rhinoceros. Unlike the rhinoceroses living in Africa today, the woolly rhinoceros was covered with thick hair. It had a compact body designed to conserve heat and a massive horn on its face. Its physical characteristics were perfectly suited to a freezing environment. Imagine being transported into this world. The air is so cold that every breath creates a cloud of vapor. Snow covers parts of the ground. The wind pushes across the empty steppe. In the distance, a group of mammoths moves slowly across the horizon. Then you notice something closer. A huge dark animal covered in thick fur. It lowers its head and continues walking. The woolly rhinoceros. It is not lost. It is not struggling to survive in an unfamiliar environment. This is its world. Its body was built for it. Its thick coat protected it from freezing temperatures. Its powerful legs carried it across difficult terrain. Its horn could help it reach vegetation hidden beneath snow. For thousands of years, woolly rhinoceroses lived across enormous areas of Eurasia. Their fossils have been discovered across regions that are today separated by thousands of kilometers. Their remains tell us that they were once widespread and successful. But no environment remains unchanged forever. Eventually, the great ice sheets began to retreat. Temperatures started to rise. The landscapes transformed. Plants that preferred cold, dry conditions became less common. Forests expanded into some regions. Grasslands changed in others. The world that had supported the woolly rhinoceros for thousands of years was slowly disappearing. But something else was happening too. Humans were spreading across the same landscapes. Our ancestors were intelligent, adaptable, and capable of hunting large animals. They could cooperate in groups, use tools, control fire, and move across enormous territories. For a large herbivore, humans were a completely new kind of pressure. Scientists still study exactly how much climate change and human activity contributed to the extinction of different Ice Age animals. The answer was probably not the same everywhere. In some places, environmental changes may have reduced populations. In others, hunting could have added additional pressure. When a species is already struggling because its habitat is disappearing, even a relatively small additional pressure can become extremely important. Eventually, the woolly rhinoceros disappeared. There was no dramatic final battle. There was no single day when the world suddenly changed. Somewhere in the ancient landscape, the last populations became smaller and smaller. Eventually, the final animal died. And with that moment, an evolutionary story that had lasted millions of years came to an end. But the rhinoceros family did not disappear completely. Some branches survived into the modern world. Today, only 5 rhinoceros species remain alive. The white rhinoceros is one of the largest living land mammals. Despite its name, it is not actually white. The name likely comes from a historical misunderstanding connected to the shape of its mouth. White rhinoceroses are mainly grazers, using their wide mouths to feed on grasses. Their bodies are enormous, but they can move surprisingly quickly when necessary. Then there is the black rhinoceros. Despite its name, it is not truly black either. It usually has a grayish skin color, similar to the white rhinoceros. The major difference is often in how they feed. Black rhinoceroses are browsers, using their pointed lips to grab leaves, branches, and shrubs. Their behavior can also be very different, with some individuals being surprisingly curious and unpredictable. In Asia, another remarkable species survives. The Indian rhinoceros has a single horn and thick folds of skin that make it look almost as if it is wearing natural armor. It once lived across a much larger region, but today its range is far more limited. The Sumatran rhinoceros looks almost like a creature from another age. It is smaller than its African relatives and has a coat of hair that makes it look surprisingly similar to some prehistoric rhinoceroses. It lives in dense tropical forests and is extremely rare. And then there is the Javan rhinoceros. It is one of the rarest large mammals on Earth. Only a tiny population survives in the wild. Imagine an animal that has existed as part of an evolutionary lineage for millions of years. Yet today, its entire living population can be concentrated in one protected area. That is how fragile the survival of some rhinoceros species has become. And this brings us to one of the most important questions. Why are rhinoceroses still threatened today? One major reason is habitat loss. As human populations grow, natural landscapes are transformed. Forests are cleared. Grasslands are converted for agriculture. Roads divide ecosystems. Cities expand. Animals that once moved freely across huge territories can become trapped inside smaller isolated areas. Another major threat is illegal hunting. Rhinoceros horns have been highly valued in illegal markets despite the fact that they are made primarily of keratin, the same basic material found in human hair and fingernails. This means that an animal can be killed for a material that has no magical properties, yet the demand has been devastating for some populations. Conservation efforts have made a difference in several regions. Rangers protect animals from poachers. Scientists monitor populations. Protected areas provide safe habitats. Breeding programs help maintain genetic diversity. International cooperation helps reduce illegal trade. And in some places, rhinoceros populations have shown that recovery is possible when protection is strong enough. But there is another reason the rhinoceros matters. It is not only an animal that deserves to survive because it is impressive. Rhinoceroses are part of their ecosystems. They influence vegetation. They create paths through dense environments. They interact with other animals. Their presence can affect the structure of the landscape around them. When a large herbivore disappears, the consequences can spread far beyond that one species. This is why protecting rhinoceroses is also about protecting entire ecosystems. And perhaps the most fascinating thing is that the rhinoceros has already survived challenges far greater than anything we can easily imagine. Its ancestors lived through dramatic changes in climate. They survived the transformation of forests into grasslands. They lived alongside giant predators. Some became enormous. Others adapted to completely different environments. One branch survived the freezing world of the Ice Age. Another adapted to tropical forests. Another became a giant grazer of African grasslands. The family kept changing because the world kept changing. But today, something is different. For the first time in the entire evolutionary history of the rhinoceros, one species has gained the ability to influence its future on a global scale. Humans can destroy habitats, but humans can also protect them. We can create national parks. We can restore damaged ecosystems. We can stop illegal hunting. We can support local communities that live alongside wildlife. We can use science to understand populations and protect their genetic diversity. In other words, the future of the rhinoceros is no longer determined entirely by nature. It is partly determined by us. Imagine returning to that ancient African plain one more time. The sun is setting. The grass moves gently in the wind. A rhinoceros walks slowly across the landscape. It looks almost exactly like the kind of animal that could have appeared in a prehistoric world. And in a sense, that is exactly what you are looking at. Behind this single animal is a family history stretching back roughly 40 million years. Behind its horn are countless generations of evolution. Behind its massive body are ancient species that no longer exist. Somewhere in its distant family tree were small forest animals, gigantic relatives, strange hornless species, and woolly giants that once walked across frozen landscapes beside mammoths. Most of them are gone now. Their stories survive only in fossils, bones, ancient footprints, and scientific discoveries. But 5 species remain. 5 branches of an ancient family are still alive today. They are feeding, moving, raising their young, and continuing a story that began long before humans existed. And that is what makes the rhinoceros so much more than a large animal with a horn. It is a living connection to a world that disappeared millions of years ago. It is proof that survival does not always mean staying the same. Sometimes survival means changing with the world. The rhinoceros changed again and again. Some forms disappeared. Others survived. Some became giants. Some became smaller. Some developed thick fur. Others adapted to tropical forests. And through all of those changes, the family continued. But now the story has reached a strange moment. The rhinoceros has survived natural disasters, climate changes, ice ages, predators, competitors, and countless evolutionary challenges. Yet its future may depend on something much more recent: human decisions. We have the power to become the reason these animals disappear. But we also have the power to become the reason they survive. Thousands of years from now, people may look back at our time and ask what happened to the rhinoceros. They might find fossils and old photographs and wonder how such an ancient animal finally disappeared. Or perhaps they will see living rhinoceroses and realize that humans chose a different path. A path where ancient animals were not simply remembered, but protected. The rhinoceros has already survived for 40 million years. Its story has crossed forests, deserts, grasslands, mountains, and frozen plains. It has survived the rise and fall of countless species, and perhaps the greatest chapter of its story is not in the past. Perhaps it is being written right now. The question is not whether the rhinoceros belongs in the modern world. It has already proven that it can adapt to an extraordinary number of worlds. The real question is whether we will allow it to remain part of ours. Because when the last rhinoceros disappears, we will not simply lose another animal. We will lose an entire branch of evolutionary history that can never be recreated. And that is why, when you see a rhinoceros standing quietly in the grass, you are looking at something much older than it appears. You are looking at a survivor of 40 million years of change, a living reminder of how powerful evolution can be. And perhaps, if we make the right choices, a survivor whose story will continue for millions of years to come.